So I would like to thank again to the people that volunteer to present their projects and their good practices into the marketplace. I would encourage to actually really use the informal spaces to continue the conversations. But now we are going to start the second idea labs with input from 4 researchers and policymakers. The theme of the second lab is education, training, work, and employment. And we're going to try to reflect and to bring examples and lessons learned from this field. I want to remind everybody about the wealth of documents that are available on the partnership page. So we have several analytical papers. Magda has one there already uploaded, a report that Clementine wrote that is also available in hard copy here, but available also on the partnership page. Several PowerPoints with a wealth of information, a paper by Daniel that is uploaded on the web page. So please, please do visit the partnership page where we have quite a lot of information available also. So as in the morning, we're going to have presentation after presentation, but after each presentation, we're going to have a short, sort of like reflective moment in a small group. So the 4 presenters of the afternoon are Magda Nico with Understanding Youth Inequalities, Layers, Tension, and a Zoom to a Case Study. Ooh. Then we have Zdenka Maskova, Cooperation between Formal and Non-Formal Education in the Czech Republic, a very concrete case study with several lessons learned. Then we have Clementine Moyart with a proposal for tackling systemic barriers to social exclusion of young people in Europe, looking a little bit on social inclusion and all the facets of this concept. And then Daniel Briggs that will bring again education into the highlight with education inequalities and its impact on young people's development. So in a round of applause, I will invite Magda to come and take the floor.
So how does this work? Yes, just okay. Yeah. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to be here. As for my introduction, I'm a sociologist. I am a researcher in the Center of Research and Sociology in Portugal, in the Lisbon University Institute. And I'm also a part of the pool of European youth researchers. This is the outline of my presentation. It follows the structure of the analytical paper on youth inequalities that is already published on the Youth Partnership site and also on the Symposium site. So please feel free to download it and check out the more developed version of my presentation today. So I was asked today to present the main points of that analytical paper. But first of all, I would like to say that the rise of youth inequalities and the rise of the popularity of this topic in the youth field must not be confused with simplicity. So although youth inequalities represent a classic topic in the youth field, it is not at all a straightforward one. And why? Because there is accumulated but simultaneously not up-to-date knowledge concerning it. Secondly, because problems and practices of both comparability and measurement of youth inequalities coexist. And thirdly, because ideological and disciplinary views and agenda shifts on the subject are sometimes hard to disentangle. So it is thus a complex moving target in research, youth work and youth policy, corners of the triangle between which, moreover, there are not only bridges but also tensions in this regard. Tensions that I believe have to be properly acknowledged before being tackled. So my intention is then to make a small contribution to the identification and clarification of some aspects regarding this complexity of youth inequalities within the European context. So first I will address the tensions and intersections that arise from 2 fundamentally different points of view and points of research, the classist approach and the generational one. Being affiliated with one of these approaches has serious implications for the youth sector, both in terms of the design of the youth policy itself and in terms of professional identity of youth workers and researchers. Secondly, having in mind that most of the European policy and documents addressing inequalities use the well-intentioned but vague and complicated concept of young people with less opportunities, I will present empirical data to try to illustrate the complexity and the uncertainty of ranking inequalities and of locating young people in those ranks. And third, I would try, if I have any time left, which I'm sure I won't, using my own empirical data from a follow-up study with young people in Portugal, how inequalities interact and accumulate or attenuate over time. And I will try to show you some changes and adaptations of young people during the Portuguese crisis. I will then finish with what could be some messages to take home, so to speak. So, first of all, choosing between the classist and the generational approach is implicitly asking the relevant question: should policies be age or class graded? This is so because in the classist approach, youth is taken as a social group that is necessarily socially diversified, constituted by different youth cultures, formed on behalf of class belongings, different economic backgrounds, different power resources, different interests and occupational situations, etc. In a way, it can be said that this classist approach is the very premise of sociology and the very premise of the study of inequalities, on the basis and the basis for all the analysis of socially stratified phenomenon, may it be by variables as gender, as social origin, education, or many other. However, this approach faces some problems when addressing inequalities. One is, in a sense, disciplinary. Because inequalities are a complex but recently becoming a very popular concept, it has gained attention from disciplines such as economics. This means that wealth and income inequalities have become absolutely hegemonic in the study of inequalities in our contemporary society. On its turn, inequality studies frequently recur to sophisticated indexes and coefficients of inequalities within and between countries, but without having neither an holistic or a diachronical approach into account. But on the other hand, in the generational approach, youth is taken as a homogeneous group, which main attribute is to be constituted by individuals on the same life stage. At the limit, it would mean that being young is per se and a priori a social vulnerability. But for this reason, it also encompasses some complications. The most serious one is to assume, even if just for the beginning of the process, argument, or policy, that a group of people that share the same birth cohort and that are currently young have a sense of belonging to that group that exceeds significantly the sense of belonging to other groups, like the sense of belonging to a specific social class or to a specific community, or the preference for a certain lifestyle or a particular professional or educational identity. So how can youth be acknowledged as having this homogenizing power of different social and cultural belongings? How contradictory is this idea with the overwhelming evidence of increasing inequalities between countries and among young people? So for these reasons and differences, the relation between these two theoretical ideological approaches and policy making regarding inequalities is very significant, even if not made explicit or even being consciously used in the very process of policy making. We can see that, although not fully contradictory, the rationales and points of ideological departure of using either classist theory or generational theory are different to the point of ending up targeting different young people for example, programs towards surpassing a specific barrier to social inclusion. There has to be, therefore, a clarification and transparency concerning the use of these theories in policy making. So the first point to stress in this table is that the classist approach is more in tune with the socially graded policy, while the generational approach is more associated with the age-graded policy. This is so because, on one hand, in the classist approach to inequalities, the a priori argument is that policy should primarily and foremost be targeted at those who are most affected or at least at risk of poverty, social exclusion, or without social rights. This is, by the way, the basis for most of the public and social policies followed at national levels. In this approach, young people would only be particularly affected by these policies if they were also particularly affected or at risk of being affected by poverty, social exclusion, or without social rights. But on the other hand, on the generational approach, policy should be primarily age-graded. In this case, it is assumed that being young is a priori condition of social vulnerability. This is more in line with the political agenda followed by the Council of Europe and the European Commission, but not necessarily by the national governments. These, on their turn, may have their own target groups of vulnerability more consensually identified, both politically and in the public opinion of those of each country. So at the European scope, the more socially graded goals of policy are followed through the many policies visible in the European official documents and agendas that are specially concerned and targeted at young people with fewer opportunities, besides the ones that are intended for all young people, independently of their vulnerable status. A second tension has to do with the relation between researchers and youth workers in regard to tackling youth inequalities, which leads us to ask another important question. Do bottom-up and top-down policies meet or clash? This tension is thus between theoretical structuralism and individualism. While youth researchers, for example, are likely to be pro-structuralism, thus being incapable of denying the predominant effect of social structure and of social contexts on individuals' trajectories and outcomes of life, by emphasizing the importance of social and public policies as a condition for the minimization and attenuation of unequal opportunities, youth workers are more or exclusively concentrated on activating or empowering young people as directly as possible, independently of the measurability or significance of the effect. This, by the way, this means that for researchers, at least the structural ones, structural conditions and policy contexts should pre-exist the combating inequalities policy implementation by whomever. So responsibility should not be put directly or predominantly on the shoulders of individuals. May they be youth workers, workers of or to the youth sector, or young people themselves. The risk of falling in what some authors called epistemological fallacy of the late modernity that I'm going to explain would be very high. According to this fallacy, and I'm quoting, blind to the existence of powerful chains of interdependency, young people frequently attempt to resolve collective problems through individual action and hold themselves responsible for their inevitable failure. This can, emotionally speaking, destroy a generation. In this case, the maximal role that could be expected from youth workers would be of mediators between the existing policy framework, set of actions, programs and initiatives and resources, and young people themselves. The limits of individual action to overcome deep inequalities would be acknowledged, but collective action would be encouraged. On the other hand, the theoretical approach of individualism would directly or most likely indirectly encourage a neoliberal discourse, in the sense that even if state intervention is not necessarily discouraged, it is assumed that it is up to the individuals, the ones that empower and the ones to be empowered, to overcome with the solitary merit of their own agency, their lack of equal opportunities and access to education, employment, health, housing and many others. So in this sense, the role expected from youth workers would be of a policy change maker themselves and to empower or activate young people directly. So the choice between different theoretical approaches should be addressed for the sake of quality, transparency and consistency of the responses of the youth sector to inequalities. But independently of our professional, ideological or theoretical approach, there are various ways to classify inequalities themselves. Terborn, for instance, uses this distinction. You have vital or life chance of human organisms that include inequalities concerning life, death and health. You have existential, or the capability of persons, that refers to the uneven acknowledgement of humans as people, where aspects such as liberty and human rights are at the very core. And then you have resources of social actors, which refers to the basis capitals like income, wealth, culture, educational power, and also to opportunities of mobility and change. But these layers are also vary according to their reversibility and to their systematic and recurrent interaction among each other and accumulation across time. Unfortunately, they are not, and they are not likely to be in the future, mutually exclusive. And this is so because there are some aspects that are simply more difficult or even impossible to reverse or overcome, as is the case of disabilities or poverties, which are represented in the bottom rectangle in this graph. This graph you can find in the report of mapping of the barriers to social inclusion that is also available, I think, in the Symposium site. While other factors are more reversible in principle, but have a highly likelihood to interact and accumulate within each other, making it harder to be addressed and making cross-sectoral policy more evidently needed. For example, being homeless, being unemployed, and having bad health, for example, the upper part of the graph. But be it as prevention or not, each intervention should not be looked at a one-time thing, as a one-time effect, but as one of the perhaps many interventions needed to contribute to overcome a specific combination of factors. Real life does not necessarily reproduce the tidy, although useful, theoretical classifications of inequalities. But one thing is for certain, it is in this notion of accumulation of inequalities that the generational and the classist approaches meet, or should or could meet, instead of clashing. Together they corroborate the need to perceive inequalities as processes of reproduction or attenuation across time, instead of being analyzed with static social categories. The understanding of this meeting between these two approaches is crucial both at the individual and the collective levels to the identification of the degree to which one is excluded, the severity of the dimensions from which one is excluded, the accumulation of and interactions between the dimensions from which one is excluded, and also the type of intervention required and by which corner of the triangle. But with all these layers of inequalities and the infinity of combinations of these layers across time, how do we define and then reach the target of the most needed policies combating inequalities? How do we pinpoint the many times called young people with less opportunities? How do we rank inequalities factors, such as the ones that are cited here by the, which are mentioned in the Youth in Action? For example, geographical, educational, disabilities, cultural, social, economic, health, and so many others. I will not actually provide you an answer, but maybe just an awareness of the complexity to pinpoint and compare young people with less opportunities, less compared to whom. Let's use an example with the data from the PISA surveys to exemplify this complexity. So we have the mean of the social, economic, and cultural status of the parents of the 15-year-olds enrolled in school kids in the horizontal, and then in the vertical you have the variability of that status. You get more or less 3 types of countries with great potential of having young people that could, in principle, be included in national or international programs towards the combat of inequalities. You have, to simplify, the poor and unequally poor countries, Portugal being the best example of the worst case scenario within the countries with available data. Secondly, the equally poor countries, needless to say that young people from these countries are more likely, just because of this, to have fewer opportunities than any other. And then the rich, in average but highly unequal countries. This is visible in countries such as Luxembourg or Germany. This means that although the mean of this cultural, economic, and educational status is high, the discrepancy between the richer and the poorer is extremely high also. So if, for hypothesis, we were to put in practice a European program including young people from some of these countries, what criteria would we use in order to fairly include people from all these countries? How would we overcome 2 assumptions? One, that these mentioned people with less opportunities represent a minority within the respective age group on its turn within a certain country. And secondly, the implicit use of the dichotomy between young people with fewer opportunities on one hand and the well-off or the young people with more opportunities on the other hand. Where is the line that separates these 2 groups in the same country? And how do we compare levels of inequalities between countries? Should we really think this as a dichotomy? Do we really need a line to separate these 2 groups? I would say no. I would say a relative thing to have in mind is that disadvantage is a comparative concept, and being or not disadvantaged with others depends on the point of reference, depends on to whom one is being compared to, depends on the social context at play. This is why, for example, labels of groups of young people are less and less operative and efficient method to identify and reach young people with less opportunities. For example, a very simple one, being unemployed in Sweden is very different than being unemployed in Portugal in the same year, for example. So this mentioned context is most of all, or first of all, national. So for example, coming from countries with low average and low availability of this mentioned status, young people from these countries have a quite homogeneous but low status. The difficulty would be who not to select to participate in these programs. On the other hand, countries with low average and high variability of this social, economic and cultural status, people from these countries would have to be selected in a classist, socially graded approach, since these countries are highly stratified. And lastly, countries with high average but minimum or low variability of this status, young people would be selected, young people to be selected from these countries would be a minority, and the difficulty could be to reach them rather than to identify them. But for European level projects, these national filters could work at the first working stage, but the process of selecting participants is extremely dependent on how topic dependent and goal dependent is the project itself. So we cannot compare without these terms of reference. Do I have time, Anka? No. But I would be glad to talk with everyone about my ongoing project. It's a follow-up project with young people in Portugal, people that I interviewed in 2009, and that I'm now re-interviewing, getting to know their lives during and after the crisis. So, yeah. Oops. So some of the messages to take home, I would say, is that the research approach, classist or generational, ends up deciding the target group. So therefore, it should not be neglected or used automatically because it is embedded in the ideology and in youth policy design. A second message would be that inequality is a process, not a state. So no one is necessarily immune to it. Therefore, interventions should be as continuous as life itself. A third message would be that inequalities are dynamic, cumulative, and holistic, and so the indicators on this should also be so. So otherwise, target and reach of policies towards inequalities reduction are compromised. And lastly, qualitative information on the processes of reproduction of inequalities are badly needed. Statistics need faces and stories, and policymakers need also to learn to feed on this knowledge, qualitative knowledge. So that's it. Okay.
Thank you, Magda, so very much. And like with the previous session, we're gonna, make small groups using the natural layout of the chairs. But I would also like to remind you again, because I think the project that Magda was talking about is quite interesting and can, give you a lot of food for thought, particularly from research and youth work point of view, that you should look for her during breaks and in the evening. So please just have 3 minutes of discussing among yourself, reflecting on Magda's presentation. Or actually, yeah, just break them. very quickly again. And your story was hilarious.
Quite a good audience.
Yes. So we were saying that there is never time enough. But what we hope is that actually...
But your time management is quite good. I'm quite an experienced like conference or international seminar attender, and really that's going, the timing is okay. That's not easy. If you are in that position, that's not easy to stop, even if there is an interesting discussion or interesting presentation. It requires kind of courage to do that. Yeah, I know.
So I would like to have everybody's attention again. Hello, hello. I am happy to see that Magda's presentation is really bringing a lot of reflections. I hope many of these will be carried into the labs later after the presentation. But now I would like to welcome Zdenka Maskova, presenting the Czech Republic case study on the symbiosis between non-formal and formal education. So Zdenka, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So beautiful people, I am here to share my life story with you. And I will come back 20 years to my history because it's unbelievable, but so far I benefit from that life experience. I reached almost 20 years ago. It will be next year, 20 years. Currently, I am working in the youth department. I am the head of youth policy unit in our Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports. And I would like to share lessons I learned what happened in my life to start my career as a youth policy maker, because I was the coordinator of the drafting phase of our current youth strategy, national youth strategy, and also I was the main drafter of this youth strategy. So what happened 20 or 19 years ago in my life? It was a couple of years after our Velvet Revolution, when we got rid of the communist past, and I won the scholarship to participate in the Fulbright High School Teacher Exchange Program in Maryland in the US. In quite a huge school. It was a school for 1,800 pupils, students. I didn't have any idea where I went. I didn't have any intercultural competencies. I had never before lived in a multicultural, intercultural community. And I was thrown into classes which were called ESOL classes. This is the abbreviation for English to Speakers of Other Languages. My students were immigrants or refugees. And at that time, I didn't have any idea that I was acting more as a youth worker. But I insisted on being a good teacher. At that time, I had still the communist past in my blood, which meant as a teacher, I was there to keep my students sitting and listening to me and memorizing something. That was the idea I came to my American school. And I was ready to do that. My class was a complete mess. I really regret that I didn't write a book after coming back, because it must have been the bestseller. Today, the present day. What was going on in my class? I had students from all the continents, Hispanic students weren't able to keep sitting. They were dancing. There was one Johnny, still I can remember his name. He believed he took after the famous actor, movie actor from soap opera, so he was dancing, kissing my Muslim female students. They were crying in my classes. I had one student, Hamira from Ethiopia, who had some mental disorder. She fell in love with the Prince William of the UK. She was crying or walking in my class, crying that probably she will not be able to marry him because the Queen will not accept the dark daughter-in-law. She was singing the national anthem to get closer to the Queen. Then I had African students who had a very strong need to tell me about all the ghosts they experience in their life. And my headmaster asked me to let my students sleep if they want to, because they were tired. They were working late hours in supermarkets, at McDonald's, in the coffee shops. And also he asked me to help them to do their homework. I was crying, really, I was crying every day back in my American house, and I regret the day when I decided to enter that program. My situation and the situation of my students changed dramatically when the headmaster announced a very strange competition, that the classes will start collecting receipts from a certain supermarket, and each month a winning class will be announced. That means that the winning class was that class that collected or spent the most dollars in those supermarkets. And I am a competitive person, so I decided to join the competition with my students, but their reaction was quite sad. They told me that this is not the competition for them because they are poor, their families are poor, they never will be able to spend so many dollars, and that the living conditions aren't good for them to enter the competition, which didn't stop me to be even more competitive. And I decided to create coalitions out of the school. At that time, even the expression non-formal education setting, it was an unknown language expression in the US. And I approached my neighbors, explained the situation that we don't have equal conditions for entering the competition, if they can go and shopping there, and then if they can bring receipts. The same I did with the neighbors in all the streets, in the parallel streets, and my students followed me, and we really succeeded in winning the competition twice in a row. After that, the American classes followed our strategy, so we didn't have any chance. But what happened, even with me, was that everything was changed. I can see the change with my students, letting them go through that feeling of success. Their motivation to study was quite high. Also, their self-confidence was quite high. And then I was thinking about a success factor or success factors. What happened? Because when I came back then from the US, I founded a Human Rights Education Center in my school. Soon we spread our activities beyond the school, beyond the town of our school, beyond even the region. And my center was the only one, a Human Rights Education Center for schools in the Czech Republic. And then the ministry, finally the ministry approached me and asked me to be the coordinator for human rights education for teachers. And after that, I was in that position to draft the national youth strategy, and I was coming back in my memory thinking about success factors. What happened? Success factor number one, I would say, was that I identified myself in the US with my students. They were the students with fewer opportunities, and I was also 100% with fewer opportunities because I didn't have a driving license. I don't have it even now because of problems with my eyes. And in the US, it was just the lowest social status if you don't have the driving license, and because I had to take the school bus with my poor students to go to school. And not only that I identified myself, but also I accepted that role of a person with fewer opportunities, and being such a person for 1 year, that was really rewarding experience for me, because now I guess I have empathy for those young people, and I can understand a complexity of their situation. Success factor number two is that me, myself, and my students went through the feeling of being successful. We proved to ourselves that we can be as successful as our American colleagues, peers were. And this is till today always in my mind, that if we decide to achieve something, we can do that if we try our best. And finally, as I mentioned also, I made a direct experience that if we, as I said, create coalitions with out of the school, with NGOs, non-formal education settings, we can achieve our goals. I will not bore you with our national youth policy. As usual, it is strategic goals elaborated further into operational goals and concrete measures. What is more interesting for you will be the instruments we have available right now to achieve the goals of our national strategy. What is marked in red color means that this is new, even in the context of our national reality. We have thematic cross-sectoral working groups. We have 13 thematic strategic goals, and we have 13 thematic cross-sectoral working groups. We have usually practitioners, also young people are represented, and ministerial colleagues who work at lower working positions, not with decision-making mandate. Then we have Youth Chamber, which is a cross-sectorial advisory body of our minister responsible for youth. We have representatives of usually the directors of respective departments of other ministries, from governmental bodies, but also representatives of our National Council for Children and Youth, and also regional representatives and representatives of municipalities. Now, we decided, this was founded a year ago, we have an expert group on linking youth work to social work, because we were approached by youth workers telling us that now their youth work requires also certain social skills to provide their young people also with social services, and they don't know how to deal with that. And the same came from social workers. They would like to introduce elements of non-formal education. Right now, we are mapping the situation, the legislation applied for both sectors. We are working on a profile of our target groups, the profile of facilities providing youth work, social work. We are mapping the situation where we can cooperate, what obstacles are here which will probably require the systematic change. We have grant schemes on supporting quality youth work, which is quite a usual thing with other national strategies, but what is quite new is the grant scheme on supporting personal development of children and young people, which is implemented directly or in a very close cooperation with formal education sector. This grant scheme motivates teachers to identify talented pupils or elementary school pupils or secondary school students, because we believe that everybody is gifted for something. So to identify or their talent or their strong interest in something or their special needs for their personal development. And once they are aware of such a situation, they can apply for money. The teachers are applying for the money, but the money goes directly to children. Just to give you an example, a simple thing, there is a child that is quite interested in animals, has quite a lot of knowledge, but has never been to the zoo because of certain situation in the family. So the teacher can go with him, her to the zoo, can organize some walking tour, I don't know, seminar for such a child, or teachers can look for some trainership for students who have, for instance, programming using IT tools, and usually students are much better than their teachers to look for some trainership for them. And those teachers are supported by the national network of regional coordinators who should link those children or should move them, forward them to non-formal education settings, to the providers of non-formal education, to the youth centers, to NGOs, and if the activities require some co-financing, also they can use that money to integrate those children, those students into non-formal education activities. And what is quite controversial, and maybe you could hear now, it will come into force in September this year. And this is, we have a new state regulation on teaching pupils with learning difficulties, plus talented pupils, because also they require a special approach. And this regulation applies only to non-formal education settings. We have a network of youth centers, we call them leisure-based centers, and they are financed through the state budget. So if parents decide to integrate their children into mainstream schools or mainstream youth centers, after consultations with the school psychologists and with specialists, the school and the youth center cannot refuse such a desire. They have to be equipped with teaching aids. They have to provide an assistant if necessary, an interpreter. They have to have an access to the building, etc. Why this is quite a controversial issue because the regulation is here. We will have just a couple of months to have it in force, but the society is not prepared. Nobody was consulting that with our society, and now parents of our students, pupils from mainstream schools are worried about the quality of education if we have more and more pupils with learning difficulties integrated into those schools. So those are instruments, and now I would like to share with you 2 personal traits I managed to incorporate into our national strategy, which was adopted last year, and it will be valid till 2020. So what I can see as a novelty, at least in the context of the Czech Republic. There are 2 innovative elements, you will guess which ones, and we can call them pillars of our national strategy. So our national strategy is built on supporting, guess what? Intergenerational dialogue. Very well, because we believe that intergenerational dialogue, if we want to promote inter-religious, inter-cultural dialogue, we should teach small children, and not only children, young people, but also adults, to be equipped for the intercultural, for intergenerational dialogue, because this is quite natural environment. You can, this is an everyday practice in families, at school, in neighborhoods, in a working place. Everywhere you can practice that, and if children from a very early age are taught how to understand not only each other but also across the generations, if they try to understand each other, they will develop an empathy, and this is what we believe should be supported. When we distribute money through our grant schemes, yes, I can see the red, I am finishing. So then that's no problem to have projects based on intercultural, interreligious dialogue, but we don't have many with intergenerational dialogue, so we encourage them also, if they organize activities, to invite parents, invite grandparents, and so on. And it might be a little bit controversial for some of you, and this is how to start the discussions afterwards, this is difficult to guess. To which extent and which we should support, because sometimes and Howard mentioned that during our discussions after the first laboratory, that sometimes we impose the support to young people who don't need support, and then we don't have enough financial human resources for other target groups of young people who need that. So we would also try to find a balance, to which extent, in which themes, and also to which target groups we should help. That's it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zdenka, very much. Your personal example was actually very inspiring, and it just shows again how much, personal involvement can bring about change. We're going to change a little bit the setting of reflection. So if there is one question for Zdenka that she can quickly answer, and if not, we'll have to jump into the next presentation because we are a little bit more behind time. One question?
So I will be available during dinner.
And Zdenka is available during dinner. Okay, so then I'm going to invite Clementine Moyart to present social inclusion. Oh, it's not this one. So, oh, sorry. I was thinking. This report. I'm going to.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting the Youth Forum here. I'm very happy actually that I had a few moments before to speak to many of you, because I think it gave me a better idea of what was expected from the Youth Forum as well. Because we had, we had a bit like the view of the academic first, and then from the youth work sector. And here it's a bit different because I don't know if you know the Youth Forum, but we are a platform of youth organizations working in Brussels. So yeah, let's say we work more on policy making, in the sense that we really work a lot with the European institutions to try to bring the voice of young people at the European level. So you will see this is not really like an academic work. We use academic work to try to make some pledges and some clear claims. So let's say this is less neutral. So I think you will, this would maybe raise some interesting points and questions for you. So yes, we have a new report now on social inclusion and young people that we call Excluding Youth, a Threat to Our Future, because we wanted to make the point that excluding youth would have consequences, okay, on youth today, on the future of young people, but also on the future of everybody. And this is why I think the conference yesterday on inequalities was very interesting as well, to show that increasing inequalities between young people and different parts of the population would have consequences not just on young people, but on the well-being of the society as a whole. We also wanted to do this report because, talking a lot at the European level with the European Commission, we were talking a lot about youth unemployment. Youth unemployment was very high on the European agenda, and that was really good, but we just realized after some points that the youth unemployment rates were not saying everything about the situation of young people in Europe today. We speak a lot about youth unemployment, but what is behind? What is the situation of young people behind? Are young people in youth unemployment benefiting from any financial assistance or from services, for example? In Germany, there is a very high youth employment rate, but we know that the number of so-called mini jobs, for instance, is really important. We also wanted to study this topic because we noticed that the crisis created some kind of new forms of exclusion, some cost containments on education, on social protection. So we wanted to try to find out as well what were the consequences of the crisis on young people. And actually we noticed that there were some gaps in European social protection systems. So this is also like a link with the presentation from Magda, because at the Youth Forum actually what we try to study as well is, are young people taking into account in the welfare state as a like specific category with its specific needs, because we believe that youth has specific needs. So our working questions were these ones, because we really very often just think that welfare states, I mean access to health, access to education, is already achieved. We wanted just to challenge this and to see if welfare states today in Europe were failing to protect young people, and if yes, why? So, I mean, you can imagine what would be my answer to this, but I will try to develop a bit. And what are like the barriers in our European protection, in our systems, that prevent the social inclusion of young people, and how to try to tackle these barriers. So first, we had some barriers in accessing quality education in VET, vocational education and training. I will not speak so much about this because I know we have time constraints, and I think we heard already a lot about non-formal education, and we believe it's very important in the Youth Forum, but I think you already have this perspective. Same on education. I think we will have like a presentation afterward on this. So I will jump directly on measures to support the transition of young people from education to work. Here as well, at the European level, we speak a lot about the role of apprenticeships, the role of internships, the role of vocational education and training to really support social inclusion of young people. It really appears as like the new solution as well to support young people into employment and into social inclusion. But we think we have to be very careful on this, because we realize through the research that actually these measures often fail to reach out to the most vulnerable youth. And that, I mean, we have the case in France, for example, we have some data that show that indeed the enrollment in apprenticeship in France has doubled over the past few decades, but at the same time, the number of apprentices without prior qualifications fell from 60% to 35%. So this increase in enrollment actually was mainly due to more people with higher qualification going into apprenticeship, probably because there was like a decrease in other like employment opportunities, for instance. So how like, I'm just mentioning some proposals here, but these are not like necessarily the best answers. These are just like proposals as well to give you some ideas to reflect. On this, on the transition measures from education to work, we really believe that we have to work on the enforcement of quality internships, for instance, because I'm quite sure that most of you here did lots of internships, very often that are not paid, and we believe that for social inclusion as well, and to decrease inequalities between young people, it's important that we lobby and we work more for paid internships as well. Otherwise, this would also like increase inequalities between young people. And same on apprenticeship. We have some example of good practice, for example, in Austria, where there's a kind of what they call supra-company apprenticeship in Austria for young people who could not find an apprenticeship, for example, via like a company. They would be offered an internship via like public employment services until they can find an internship into like a private company. So then I would go more like into like barriers in accessing quality jobs, because this is really mainly what we work on at the European Youth Forum. We believe there are like lots of barriers to access quality jobs. Because at the European level here as well, we speak always about we need to put young people into jobs, but we tend to be willing to put young people into any kind of jobs, what we say like jobs at any cost for young people. But this is much more difficult for young people to access real quality jobs. The main issue, for instance, are like the existence of youth minimum wages in most of the EU member states in different forms. In the Netherlands, for example, you have up to 8 different rates for young people. When you are like 18, you would earn more, like the youth minimum wage would be around like 45% of the adult rate, and then each age it would increase a bit until arriving to the full amount of adult rate. And here, as the International Labour Organization highlighted, we also believe that this kind of sub-minimum youth wages conflict with the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. Then, of course, you have like the precarious jobs and the multiplication of non-formal forms of jobs for young people. Like with precarious jobs, young people are not able to take part to the, for example, contributory system, social protection systems, or pension system, for example. We have the case with the mini-jobs in Germany, for instance. And yes, we think it's important that young people already start thinking about pensions, because we very often think that, okay, this is young people and pension is more about like older workers, but this is not the case. We really encourage like youth organization to already like have their word on this and to say that the work that they have today will have implications for the future as well. And then linked to this, I would also like to add like the development of new forms of work and income. That is really important as well. And we tend to under-evaluate sometimes. We have the kind of what we call the sharing economy, the collaborative economy, or even more like with Uber and the kind of Uberization of the society. I mean, this is something that is very popular amongst young people because, of course, I mean, they do not have so much opportunities. They are looking for new opportunities, and this is an opportunity for them to gain more income. But we have to be careful about this as well, and to make sure that the systems can offer some kind of protections to these workers, because there is no like protection of minimum wage, for example, in this system. So we also believe that young people must be careful about this and have the word on this. So, I mean, quickly on our proposal, of course, we ask to end age-based discrimination in access to minimum wages. And as I said, we ask to rethink a bit the contributory pension systems, to try to adapt it better to the reality of people's employment trajectories, especially with the new forms of contract of young people now, and to make sure that we still protect workers' rights, even if, of course, we understand the need to protect as well the creative freedom of business. We still need that young people need to be protected in these new opportunities. And the last point, maybe the last barrier, is about accessing decent income. So you had a presentation yesterday from the European Anti-Poverty Network on this, on the difficulty for young people to access decent income. So this is like the same but more focused on young people, because I'm sure you already had this issue as well. It's very difficult for young people to access unemployment benefits, because in most of OECD countries you need to work at least 12 months before accessing unemployment benefits, which is difficult for young people who are like finishing universities or going for like one short jobs to another one. Is difficult to bank enough working times to have access to these unemployment benefits. So what is then available for them, this is what we try to study in this report as well. In some countries you have access to kind of reduced unemployment benefits or some kind of minimum income schemes, but in some countries you have to wait until, for example, you are 25 in France to have access to these minimum income schemes, or 24 in Spain. So what is happening, you know, between like the time you leave home, between you get like you're 18 and between you get like 24, 25? So here, I know I don't have so much time anymore, so my main proposal would be really like to push for an independent supporting approach to young people. Because like regarding this access to decent income, for example, the main argument that member states are using to say that young people do not need these minimum income schemes is that many member states already have like important family benefits. Okay, but family benefits, to benefit from these family benefits, you can benefit from them until the child is around like 17 years old in average. So what is happening between 17 years old and 25 or 28 or 30 years old? Because we know that the transition now for young people has been much more delayed as well, and that they are not like being independent when they get like 18. And this, we also think, this kind of stay-at-home policy really tends to neglect the individual circumstances of young people. We just think that any young people can just stay at home and has the possibility of staying at home. So this also increases inequalities between the different young people. So I had some points about housing and health. Actually, on mental health, I think we had an interesting presentation yesterday to insist on this point. And on housing, I will not mention it too much because there's a lot to say, but this is a bit the same. We also ask for more support to independent approach, because many member states noticed that actually the risk of young people to fall under poverty is higher when young people leave home. So they had two choices, whether they could like support the autonomy of young people and support them financially to get independent, but actually for the moment most member states are deciding to support them to stay at home actually. So like some very quick conclusions. What we see is that for us, a distinct category of youth with these very specific needs and all the new challenges that are brought by the crisis, but also by the new forms of work, are still not taken into account in our like specific social protection systems. We also see the problem of multiple discrimination against young people, because first we believe that being youth is already sometimes like difficult today, for example in accessing the labor market, but if you are young and you are a woman, if you are young and you are young people with disability, if you are young and you are like from a different ethnic background, this is even more difficult. Then we see that short-term decisions are clearly prioritized versus long-term and sustainable choices for Europe, with like putting young people into any kind of jobs instead of finding sustainable solutions for them and making sure that young people can contribute to building like the future society. So we really believe that systemic changes are needed, and that we all need to work together for these systemic changes, meaning that we need to work for to have a new approach to social protection system with new really safety nets for young people, to ensure social inclusion of young people into this system, to ensure that these systems make it possible for young people to be included, and not that young people have to adapt to this system to integrate themselves. And for this, our main point is really that we need the participation of young people in the decision-making process. So this is a call for all of you as well to be involved in this broader picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Clementine, very much. I think the same as with Zdenka, if there is one question for Clementine in the audience, if not, we're gonna then thank you, and I hope we'll take all the reflections into the labs. And I'm going to invite Daniel Briggs to talk to us about education inequalities and its impact on young people's development.
Everyone else has gone over 15 minutes, so I'm going to. What? All I do is just ignore the card when you hold it up. I'm joking, I won't do that. Oh yeah, right, okay. Thanks very much for inviting me to this forum. After having some conversations with you over the last day or two, it's really quite inspiring to listen to him talking over there. And laughing. Must be a good joke. It's very inspiring to hear the work you do at different levels as, you know, people who work on a ground level like your organisation directly with young people, practitioner level, policy making level, or people like myself who are researchers. It's only a shame that the two people in the suits yesterday couldn't stay a bit longer and listen to the stories, listen to what we really are saying, because that's part of the change that I think we need to have if we really are to think about how we can improve things for young people. I'm very fortunate because over the last 15 or 16 years, lots of my time has been dedicated to researching young people in different sorts of circumstances, mostly extremely problematic, using a particular methodology which is basically going out of fashion. The methodology is called ethnography. And with ethnography, you invest a lot of time observing, interviewing, and learning about the people under study. Okay? It's a method which, for various reasons, people aren't using anymore, which is a real shame. And if, as Magda said, we want to get away from statistics, then this is the way forward, although increasingly fewer people are actually doing this. What I have to talk about today in probably 13 minutes now is related to reconsidering the philosophy of learning that we have at the moment, which involves reconsidering quite a lot of how social life is constructed these days. Meritocracy gone wrong, the way we think about how, unfortunately, given that inequality is increasing, we are moving swiftly into an arena of no return. Okay, people may look at me as being pessimistic or skeptic, but the truth is, if we look at how inequality has risen since the crisis and not learned adequately enough since the crisis, then there should be major alarm bells being sounded. So, I looked at some of the European documents about young people and inclusion, education, and I concluded these 3 points. I could see that Europe has its strategic objectives to be included as a global participator in what's called knowledge economies, okay? It wants to improve human capital among young people. It wants to get them prepared for the job market by making them highly skilled, okay? Highly skilled means doing well at school, progressing to university, you're getting a degree, and thereafter they live long and happy lives with a job, okay? We all know that that dream is very distant for a lot of young people, even ones who actually are supposedly highly qualified. So yesterday the figure was thrown around, I think it was 55%. In the documents I've read, it's 40%. So by 2020, you know, there's this objective to have loads of people, young people, getting university degrees. But as you know, we live in this time of insecurity, risk. There are increasingly questions about where we're going in terms of the ecology of the earth, very high levels of unemployment. Depends if you trust the figures, because a lot of those figures are massaged by politicians and powerful people, and obviously increasing inequality. Perhaps as a result, we are seeing increasing levels of social unrest, pockets of disturbances, young people saying, fuck this, I've had enough of this, I'm going to do something about this, I'm not happy about the chances I've got in life, okay? And those pockets of resistance we've seen, even in some of the equal societies. I think the term used by Professor Wilkinson yesterday was equal societies. Well, not so equal if young people are standing up and saying, we want change. So there's a massive dissolution of certainty of the future, gross profiteering on the part of the corporations and companies, and major downsizing, which is affecting, from what I can see, a middle to lower bracket. I'm talking about class, if anyone wants to use that word. And in this literature, the rhetoric in these wonderful European documents, there are commitments that claim to be made to reduce this, yet still we find ourselves in the position of millions of young people not being able to access and even falling out of this process, school, university, job, okay? I overheard a conversation last night from a lady from Slovenia. She's probably not here, I don't know if she's here. And she was describing the dilemma in her country, where she was saying that lots of people were highly skilled and finishing university and they couldn't get a job, and it was a dog-eat-dog world. It was very competitive. So obviously what happens when you have labour markets shrink and you are having a system which is funneling as many young people as possible using a range of different commercial ways into the higher education industry, what happens? Well, then you rely on developing a kind of philosophical, subjective approach to how you deal with your life based around personal responsibility, okay? So, and this is buttressed and supported in other forms of cultural, social life, commercially as well. You only have to turn on reality TV programs to see the way there are loads of these rags to riches stories to keep the dream alive. Poor people can be rich if they work hard. So the pressure now is on the individual to rise above their socioeconomic circumstances, develop personal resilience in the belief that hard work will deliver individual achievement and anything is possible, okay? And you see that very philosophy in the programs that you deliver or that are delivered by various agencies. The idea that you need to empower someone to be able to recognize their ability, to be able to be translated in some sort of educational opportunity or even job, okay? I'm not criticizing anyone in this room for doing that. Well, I'm making a point more systemic about the problem of this philosophy. So this automatically installs a individual competitiveness and a sense of responsibilization for personal success, okay? So people these days, young people, they feel that they expect of themselves as well as the social pressure to expect, okay? So when they don't find, or when they fail at school or fail in higher education, wherever they don't find a job, they absorb that pressure, which is structurally created. So they subjectively incorporate the structural pressure into them, okay? So when they fail twice as hard, okay? So in a competitive society which determines who does well and who doesn't, there can only be winners and losers, okay? Remember that winners and losers concept. I'm going to come to it in a minute. Okay, so this neoliberalization, the word has been thrown around a little bit so far. What happens? Well, given that we know that governments are slowly or not so slowly reducing how they invest in education systems across Europe, this means that a lot of these institutions are responsible for themselves, have business models, business plans to try and recuperate or survive, as it were, okay? So, along with that come all this sort of bureaucratization of performance outcomes and league tables, the need to be shown to be performing and have good employability outcomes and all this sort of stuff, which doesn't make great sense, a deal of sense to me, but it's very important for these institutions to show it so that they get reputation, they get increased funding, increased exposure and reputation, okay? I'm going to talk about two examples, the school and the university here. And in the report I've written, I've given you some examples about how this is taking place in some other countries. In the UK, which is where I'm from, although I don't look as if I'm English at all, we have what's called the notion of the academy, which was introduced about 15, 16 years ago to offer some sort of high-class education, and it was introduced in these sort of disadvantaged areas, okay? So areas with poor performing schools, areas where the students didn't really go to class or didn't do exams very well. Okay, what happened? Well, those schools closed as a result of the academies being put there. Not all the students in those very same areas qualified for the academies. And there was some research done recently from the University of Loughborough and Kingston that said that these academies were operating very selective admissions practices, okay? They didn't teach the local community, and they were effectively excluding the most poor and vulnerable students, okay? That's just one example in the report. There are some other examples of how that's taking place in Europe. In the same context, that very same thing is happening, and I can tell you from my personal experience, having worked for a dud university in the UK, really poor league position, very disadvantaged students, huge learning difficulties culturally, academically. I remember when a colleague of mine came to me who wanted to develop a new master's degree, which we'd had 15 applications from the Middle East, and each of these students would have paid thousands to come here. We had to review the applications. There was not one perfect sentence written in English in these applications, and I said, look, we can't let these guys on here. I'm sorry, it's really, it's unfair. But of course, the pressures that be said, welcome, come into our university. You're essentially going to give us £200,000 over 1 year. Okay, so this is the way educational institutions operating at different levels, okay? It doesn't matter, come into the university, you can be what you want to be, you can realize your dreams, you can come and study, and from what I can see, there is a major mismatch in terms of the lower disadvantaged people coming into this education system and not being provided not only with the support, but being absent in the cultural capital they have. So, these winners, well, we heard it from, I think the chap's name was Stuart, although I don't trust my memory whatsoever, and that's not because I went drinking last night, I'm just getting old, okay? Who said yesterday that essentially the people that come through this trajectory, okay, that go to school, that do well, that then perhaps go travelling, oh, that's amazing, and then go to university, do well, get a job, they're basically people who are richer. Okay, they've got more money, they've got more economical power, all right? They're the people that go to the more prestigious universities, hence they are recognized more by companies, employers to have taken this trajectory, and they are favored, okay? We could safely call them the winners, all right? They have the cultural capital to change industry if necessary as well, okay? The losers, well, that's increasingly, and in this sort of context, a guy standing talks about the precariat, this expanding number of people that are growing at the bottom of the social strata as a consequence of the middle class starting to diminish. The losers are the people who believe this dream, who believe, oh yeah, I can work hard and I can get what I want if I just get a degree and then I'll find a job and it'll be all nice. No, these disadvantaged people are coming into the education system, perhaps doing okay at school, yeah, fair enough, but they don't qualify to get into a good university. They just get enough, and that means that that disadvantages them quite substantially. Okay, remember, we're in a cutthroat world. A lot of these young people in this disadvantaged bracket are up against their higher class equivalents, okay, when they get out. Of course, they don't have that cultural capital which these middle to upper class bracket have. So again, this is the cycle which happens. They go to university, they do okay, attend some classes, get a temporary job, there's limited choice. Okay, I'm going to go and study again, do another diploma course, do a master's. Oh, still I need more experience. I'll find a temporary job. And, the service sector is very open to just swallowing these people, okay, on 0-hour contracts. I don't know if you have that or know what that means. That's the notion that young people get a job for 0 hours a week, but they're called when they're needed, and that's basically it. They're off the unemployment statistics. These people aren't able to realize their dream, and also their dreams are pacified. What does that mean? Well, they not only participate in this what I call conveyor belt education, looking as if they're doing something, looking as if they're investing in themselves and they're developing their own human capital, which is fine. Everyone's allowed to do that. But it doesn't really result in anything permanent, okay? Which is why they always seem to find, I'm talking generally here, themselves in these low-grade, low-wage jobs which are only temporal, okay? The lack of success, frustration, and sense of indignation is quashed by commercial distraction mechanisms, okay? There is always the psychological safety net of consumerism. There's always that reality program to entertain me. There's always some shit I can put on Facebook to make me feel better. There's always some drug addict on the street to make me feel better. This sort of keeps them in this cycle. It quashes their motivation to being indignated, which is why we haven't seen more sustained levels of social unrest. Okay, the people right at the bottom, well, it's basically those born into severe deprivation, which you know about. They're already blocked in terms of their circumstances. They live in politically disenfranchised conditions. I mean, I know we've had a conversation about rural areas, and I haven't included that in the report, but there's a significant number of them in urban spaces. It will be interesting to see what will happen with the refugees coming into Europe at the moment and what position they will occupy as a consequence of the pyramid of the social strata moving up one or not, or just expanding at the bottom. In the research I've been doing on refugees at the moment, a lot of people I've spoken to in Turkey and Spain, and even the North Africa and Algeria, have been working in very precarious circumstances, even putting their own sons and daughters who are no older than 11 or 12 to work for perhaps a few $100s a month. So I don't know if you can work out the maths of what that calculates per hour, and it's certainly a lot less than $1. So it will be interesting to see how the structure of Europe will change as a consequence of this injection of a new population, and how that translates to the existing problems that we already encounter with socially excluded populations, and trying to correct the way we offer people opportunities. Okay, these people are distant dreamers, okay? They flirt with the idea that there's a possibility for them, but generally their sense of their own position completely dominates the possibility. So where's this going? You haven't shown me a card, which is good news. Oh, thank you. Oh, just how convenient. I'm just on the conclusion now. So look, I'm not saying that this is the wrong way to do things, okay? I don't know the answers. What I'm saying is that there's a major problem if you have a generic system which is trying to incorporate human capital generation or human capital accumulation into everyone and expect that to work for everyone. Because people, for different reasons, along the class structure, gender, ethnic, all these different sort of lines of measurements we can take, don't adhere to this generic model, okay? Education institutions and private enterprises, from what I can see, I'm not just saying this, in the report there's some evidence as well, don't do favours for people in the margins. You know, you can't, basically it's the opposite, they're exacerbating the problems of the poor by completely taking advantage of that. I use the example of millions of young people who we invite to university and we teach, who leave in massive debt without a job. I mean, thousands in debt. What happens long term for these people right at the bottom? Well, it's a fairly well-known story that by sidelining them and neglecting them politically, all this business, that they will basically maintain these positions, and this will eventually, if not, secure them in this sort of a criminal pathway. And that will have costs for society in terms of the other social institutions which are dealing with them. But as a drug addict once said to me addicted to crack cocaine, he said, in life, someone is paid to manage someone else's misery. And I think that's totally correct, is that, you know, all this is kind of set up structurally to benefit from other people's misery, okay? It's not great, is it really? It's very sad. And like I said, I'm just really annoyed that the important people, the people, you know, who should be listening to these things didn't stay. That's the kind of level of change I'm calling for. But that's not a criticism of everyone in this room. You do great work, but People like those two guys in the suits that disappeared very quickly, had a lovely picture as well. They need to stay and listen to this stuff. Thank you.